Okay, so when we look at this, we have, how many reds are there? So it's right there. 9. And in total there are 31. So what are we doing? We're basically trying to find out the allele frequency. How often an allele appears in a population, okay? So again, there are 9 reds, 31 total, which are, or 29% of the total population. How many greens are there?
8.
And 31 total for about 26%. Blue, there are 8 as well, 31 total, 26%. Bless you. Purple, there are 6 with 31 total for a population or low frequency of about 19%. So the purpose of looking at this is the original population before the drastic event. Again, drastic event can include wildfires, it can include drought, meteor strikes, earthquakes, tsunamis, diseases, whatever the case may be, but whatever happens, it reduces the population size. So this is the original population. This is shortly after the drastic event, and as we notice, what do we see? What do we see from the original population to the population after the drastic event, immediately afterwards? Only the purple and green survive, right? How many purples do I have?
3.
How many greens do I have?
2.
Again, these are just referencing alleles, okay? They can be whatever, they could be long necks, I don't know, whatever. But in this new population, so after around 50 years after the drastic event, this is the new population, and let's look at what the red allele frequency is. What is it? 0, because there's none, right? And green, what is it? 26%. And for blue, 0%. For purple, 74%. So as you notice, what happens to the allele frequency from before the drastic event to after the drastic event? What happens to the allele frequencies? Do they stay the same or do they change? They change. What changes? The green stay the same, but what happens to the purple? So right here, the purple was 19%, which was the lowest one, correct? It goes from 19% to what?
74.
Which is basically 3/4 of the entire population has this purple trait. Does that make sense? Now, what can we infer about this purple trait? One, maybe it could be dominant. Was it dominant before? No, not necessarily. So maybe it wasn't dominant. Maybe it could be like co-dominant or something. You don't know.
It increases fitness.
What about increases fitness? Can you get that as well? So again, remember that before it was what? 19%. Something happened. What happened? We don't know. Some drastic event, correct? So something happened in the buildup of this new population. What is the purple's allele frequency?
74.
So that means that whatever happened, the purples just happen to have more.
Fitness.
What does fitness mean? An increase in the number of offspring. Or in other words, purple alleles, if you have it, you just happen to get more resources. Does that make sense? So again, I want us to understand that during genetic drift, these drastic events change the allele frequencies drastically. Okay, again, we can see that alleles that were not very common could become what?
Common.
If they are advantageous. Does that make sense? Okay. Remember, like we showed the red beetle moving to the purple beetle population, right? And if red is dominant and purple is recessive, why didn't the entire purple population become red? Because something was stopping that red beetle from what? Reproducing. Because purple was advantageous in this population. Does that make sense? So we have just, I feel like I'm losing out, but maybe I'll just, is it the light? See, We'll move on. Now, this is another example of genetic drift. Genetic drift, founder effect is an example of genetic drift. And as you see it here, it says a founding population of a species arrives at a new location, but the allele frequencies come from the founding population. So if you look right here, this is the original population, which we see green, we see red, we see what? Blue, we don't see any purples. But in founder effect, no drastic event occurs. What does drastic event mean again? Natural disaster, asteroid, fires, tsunamis, whatever, right? None of those things happen. We take a small percentage of the population and they are the founders of an entirely new area. What does that sound like? Take a couple of them and they are the foundation of a completely new area. Starts with a G. What happened on the Galapagos Islands? Literally all of them are examples of founder effect. Because the tortoises that first got there, they were a small number, right? And then so many generations later, we have all these different tortoises, all these different birds, all these different cacti, all these different plants and animals that came from an original small population of individuals. Okay? So you can see here, it says Galapagos Islands, but also the what? Hawaiian Islands, and honestly just islands in general. Another really great example of the founder effect is the Amish community. So when we think about Amish people, they're a small set of people, right? A small group of people founded the Amish communities, and people don't really like just wanting to join the Amish, right? And very few actually leave, so that means that all of the alleles that are there were from the first founders that founded the Amish communities. But those first founders actually had maybe one, maybe two people, had something called polydactylism. Polydactylism is where you have more than 5 fingers or toes. So because that one person, maybe two, it's most likely just one, that one person had it, and no one's really leaving or joining the Amish community, that specific physical trait or allele gets pushed and pushed more and more into the population. So there is a higher incidence, it's still low, but it's still a higher incidence of polydactylism in people in the Amish community. So what I want you guys to do is to basically what we did right here, but for this one, okay? So this side of the room, you guys are gonna do this, and then the opposite side of the room, you're gonna do this, okay? And then I'll write the answers up there. You're gonna turn the page at the top. You looking for a, if you can't count them, just take a picture of it and then look at your phone. That might help you. Someone said they were moving earlier. Let's see it. So on this side of the room, Fernanda, how many reds are there?
10.
And Sovereign, how many greens are there?
11.
How many blues are there, Shantice?
9.
How many purples are there, Maya?
0.
What is the total, Marlene?
I think I counted 30. I'm not so sure.
I think it's right. Yeah. Alicia, what is the percentage that we have? Krizani, did you do it?
Oh yeah, it's 0.33.
Remember, just multiply it times 100%, right? So 33%, and what about green? Who did it? Savannah, did you do it? What is the percentage?
33.
33% as well? For green?
Well, 'cause I got,
36.
for 10, I got 30. That's all. It's 30.
Got 36.
36 for green? Okay, I think it's 36. I think it was really close. And then blue, what is blue? Maham, did you do it? What is it?
30%?
30%. Yeah, because it gives you actually like 99%, but it's fine. Again, we're not doing it like, this is a math class, so we're fine. Also, you will be doing this on your final, or your exam, and it asks you to compare the frequencies, so, but the numbers are like 25, 50, 75, 100%. So I made sure all the math does it. You could do it in your head if you wanted to, like you don't, it's not gonna be like that, okay? All the math is like, I think the numbers are like 25, 10. So if there's 10 out of 20, what is that?
50%.
Okay, 5 out of 20? 25%. 15 out of 20? 75%. Those are the numbers, literally, those are the numbers, okay? I would brush up on my device skills just in case. I mean, I know your math, I mean, some of y'all probably haven't had math like in a year, so that's okay. Now, what about this side? So red, Mimi? Green, Jonathan? The total, not the percentage.
22?
22. Blue, Haley?
9.
And purple, Kiaya.
0.
And this is gonna be 0%, 0%. What is the total,
31.
Diana? 31. And Eli, what is the percentage?
Uh, 73.
73. And what is the percentage? Vanessa? What is it? 29?
Oh, that's 71.
Oh, okay. I didn't know who was right. I forgot. So 71 and 29, that makes 100, right? So again, same thing. What is the change in the allele frequency from the original population? Again, this is founder effect, not what? In bottleneck effect, there is some kind of drastic event, hurricane, earthquake, whatever, right? This is an example of founder effect where a small subset or small individuals or small population of individuals found or are the founders of a completely new area like islands, okay? So as you look from this population to, or original to new population, what is the difference in alleles that we see? Same thing. Blue is what? 29, blue is what? 30. Green is 36, but green is 71. Again, something on this island or this new area provides the green alleles to be more, starts with an A.
Advantage.
More advantageous or more adaptive. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So why did it do that?
Okay, moving on. 'Cause I don't even know what's that. So now we're gonna look at natural selection. So go ahead and read that for me, please. Fernanda, go ahead, please.
Natural selection can occur in patterns that depend on selections, pressures, and population environments.
What are selection pressures? Or environmental pressures, which is another way that we can say that. Jonathan, what is one?
The type of food.
The type of food, or how much food is there, right? What else? The predators in the area, because remember that if you're like, there's a cheetah there, and it runs fast and catches you, what's gonna happen?
You're gonna have to come
You die. So that means that you have to run
fast.
faster, right? So that's a selective pressure. What's another one? The climate, the environment, things like that. Okay, that's fine. We'll get to it in a second. So, okay, let's move on. Esperanza, go ahead and read the next one for me, please.
All the agent that produces adaptive evolutionary changes drives evolution.
So, when we look at this, mutations, what are mutations? Again, does nature go in and change the DNA on purpose?
No.
It's all what?
Random.
It's all random. And when we look at genetic drift, it's what?
Random.
Random changes. When we look at non-random mating, yes, you're selective, but you're only selected of the individuals that are there. And then when we look at gene flow, it's movement of genes from one population to the next. But I want you guys to understand that when we look at all of these other ones, natural selection is the only one that's actually selecting or actually choosing specific traits that get moved on to the next generation. Another great way to look at this is, I'm gonna show you this picture really quickly. So looking at this picture right here for selection, do we choose which ones get to move to this island? No. So when we look right here, do we see that this bird, as nature, as a predator, is choosing which trait is going to be adapted? Which trait is adapted, the green color or the yellow color?
Green.
The green color, because the yellow color is
More visible.
what? The caterpillars with the yellow colors get eaten.
Eaten.
Does that make sense? Okay. And looking at the first type of selection, natural selection, we see that this is called directional selection. Where have we seen this word before? I didn't talk about it. But you did talk about it. Lab?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's in our lab manual.
It's in your lab manual, yeah. For last week.
Oh, we can talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, y'all should. I used to turn the lights on. Y'all are looking a little too sleepy. So, yes. Oh, perfect time. So, again, directional selection is a subtype of natural selection because, again, we are what? What's this word?
So
We are selecting for specific traits, but what kind of trait are we selecting for? What are we selecting for?
One extreme.
One extreme. So, for example, if you look at the very, very bottom of your notes on that page, I would go ahead and write the dotted line to mean the original population and the solid line to denote the new population. So if the new original population is in the middle, right here, it's going towards one what?
Extreme.
One extreme. So if you look right here, what is the extreme?
Long tail.
Very long tails. Again, why? It doesn't matter. We're not trying to figure it out. We're just trying to say that nature is selecting for very long tails. Again, why? It doesn't matter. Okay? It could be because a predator, it could be because it's good for, gets more food, more mates, I don't know. Again, it's just dependent upon whatever. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Stabilizing selection is natural selection that selects for what kind of traits?
Intermediate.
What's intermediate mean?
In the middle.
In the middle. So we're not choosing, as you can see right here, we're not choosing really, really long tails. We're not choosing really, really short tails. We're choosing tails that are
In the middle.
in the middle. Okay. Now, if you look right here, it says, example includes the intermediate birth weight of humans. Smaller and larger have a greater tendency to die. So, let's think of it like this. Who has any like siblings or cousins or nieces and nephews that have been born in recent memory, and you know how much they weigh? Or do you know how much you weighed when you were a baby? Not right now. Diana?
My brother was 10 pounds.
10 pounds? How, was he late?
He wasn't, but I was.
What, he wasn't late and he was 10 pounds? Jesus, your mom must have been like struggling. 10 pounds? Jesus, that's a lot. Okay, well that's the outlier, but we'll talk about it in just a second. But that's a good point, because that's gonna be what we're gonna talk about. Eli, what about you?
9.2 pounds.
Baby,
I was 9 pounds too. I was a big baby. But I was like, my mom was 3 weeks late with me. Like, I just did not want
My mom was a week and a half early with me.
to. So they probably induced. Or that's what they
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about them in a second. Haley?
My brother was 4 pounds.
Okay, y'all aren't, okay. Good numbers. Second period did good. Mimi?
7.
Okay, 7. Okay, there we go.
6 pounds.
Okay, good. 6 pounds, 7 pounds, 4 pounds, 10 pounds, 9 pounds. Mike?
My niece was like 4 pounds.
Okay. Okay, well, it's okay. We'll talk about it in a second.
Oh, I was like 9 and my brother was 10.
The brother that's a stick.
Yeah.
That's not mean. He is. Have y'all seen his brother? His brother's so skinny.
I mean, he's kind of mean.
No, he's not. He's like really skinny. But anyone else? Anyone? Oh, these are bad numbers, guys. Okay, so the point was, well, I'll just show you. In second period, there was like 1-5, but most of them were like 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and 6 to 7 pounds. So most humans are actually born between 6 and 7 pounds. Anything less than about 5.5 pounds, it's usually someone that was
Premature.
probably premature, right? And if greater than 8 pounds, then you're probably more likely, again, either late term, or they probably got like the date wrong in terms of like when you were actually first pregnant. It was probably sooner, so in that case, that's probably what it was. And as in Eli and your brother, or Diana's brother, remember that if it's a bigger baby, what's the problem with that? Or even a smaller baby, what's the problem with that? If it's a bigger baby, do you guys know how large the vaginal canal has to be able to push the baby out? 10 centimeters. So let's look at this. Let's look at what 10 centimeter is. This right here. 10 centimeters. This is why when you look at newborn babies, newborn, not like 2 days old or a day old, like hours old. What does their head look like?
Like,
Well, yes, they do look ugly. Anyone that says like a 1 day old or 2 days old baby is cute, they're lying to themselves. Their heads look like cones because they're literally fitting through what?
10 centimeters.
10 centimeters. That's also why, if you didn't know, like when you hear the word soft spots, that's why babies have soft spots, because their entire skull isn't sealed together. It happens as you get older. Okay, but the point still stands. 10 centimeters. This is how large the vaginal canal is to push through a kid. So if you have a larger baby, more than 8, 9 pounds, what is the problem?
It's too small.
Their head is probably too big to fit through
That's small.
10 centimeters. Now, what do? If the baby is bigger? They
A
usually have a
C-section.
C-section or a cesarean section, right? And then take the baby out, done, right? But what about, let's just say 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago?
They had no C-section?
They had no C-section, so what does that mean?
They
The
die.
baby probably
mom
died.
Not only did the mom die, but the
Baby.
baby died as well. What about if you have someone who is born with, that's, let's just say 4 pounds, 3 pounds? Again, we said that they were probably premature, right? So you don't have things that are developed within your body, and you probably don't have a lot of fat as well. So what does that mean? You probably will most likely die. Because usually when you have preemies, what do? They stay where? In the NICU, in the incubators for a long time. Why? Because the babies still have to develop. So the point is that human birth weight is literally a perfect example of stabilizing selection. Too big, the baby can't fit through the vaginal canal. Too small, the baby is underdeveloped and doesn't have enough fat to actually live. Because again, yes, humans have clothes and stuff, but we're still animals. And we're pretty hairless compared to our other primate cousins. So that means that if you have a baby that is 5 pounds sitting out in, like right now, right? Even 60-degree weather, 50-degree weather, the baby will die. Okay, does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Let's look at the next one. Disruptive selection. So in disruptive selection, which traits are being selected for? Both what? Extremes. So if you look at this example, this rodent species, we can see that very, very long tails and very, very what? Short tails are both being selected for. Again, why? It doesn't matter. It could be whatever environmental pressures that this particular species is facing. Okay. Go ahead and read that example for me, please, Mimi. The last bullet point.
Example includes the block that we see type of.
So again, in disruptive selection, you have organisms of the same species that have 2 extremes in terms of their physical traits. How do they have 2 extremes in the first place? I want you guys to look at right up here. What is this word?
Genetic variation.
Again, genetic variation is what? Carlos, go ahead and read that for me, please.
Leads to natural differences in members of.
Leads to natural differences, extremes, in the same species. So for example, it says black-bellied seed cracker finch. I know it's a big word, or a long name for a bird, but it is what it is. So if you look right here, come on, I'm gonna do the pointer. So what do we notice about this beak compared to this beak? Which one is bigger, left or right? Left. We can see that it is, if you look at the head, it kind of like goes smooth, right? It's all, okay. But this one, what does it do? It's not smooth, it kind of like dips down a little bit, right? So this is clearly a smaller beak. So again, same population, but we have what? 2 completely different beak sizes. Why? Again, kind of going back to the Galapagos Islands in lecture 2, and we did talk about it. Remember, in years where there is droughts, what kind of seeds are left? Not smaller seeds in years of drought. Bigger seeds that are harder to crack because they're so dry, right? Right here. But in wetter years, there's what? More smaller seeds. So again, the idea of the Galapagos finches, beak sizes, and these black-bellied seed cracker finches are a perfect example of this, okay? Peppered moths are also another good example of disruptive selection. And these mice are another perfect example of disruptive selection. So what are these mice called? It says it right here somewhere. They're called pocket mice. These pocket mice come in two different colors, a black and a brown. What do you notice about the brown as it's living right here, or running around on this rock? It's easily spotted by what? The predator. Because of the color difference, it can spot the mice and they can eat them, right? But if the mice are living over here in the sandier part of the environment, what happens? They're harder to what? They're harder to spot. But over here in this drier environment with the lava rocks, the darker ones do what? Blend in, again, being harder for the predators to catch them. Does that make sense? So either getting food, hiding from predators, and same thing from hiding from predators. All of these are environmental pressures that select for both extremes. Make sense? Thumbs up, yes? Okay, good.
Occur. When the pressures are from the environment, it's called natural selection. It's the gradual process by which heritable traits become either more or less common in a population because of pressure from the environment. But what are these pressures? Examples of pressures include overpopulation, which leads to resource competition, changing environments, and predators. Truly anything that will break Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium will cause natural selection to occur. And when it does occur, there are three types of natural selection: directional, stabilizing, and disruptive. In directional selection, individuals that display a more extreme form of a trait have a greater fitness than individuals with average form of the trait. For example, the peppered moth population of England during the Industrial Revolution had higher frequencies of darker colors because it was well camouflaged in the soot-covered trees. The lighter colored moths would have been easily seen and eaten by birds, and if they're eaten, they can't reproduce. In stabilizing selection, individuals with the average form of the trait have the highest fitness. For example, in robin's eggs, a clutch of 4 eggs is best, because too few, and there might not be any that survive, too many, and they may be too hard to feed and sustain, so 4 is the best balance. In disruptive selection, individuals with either extreme variation of a trait have greater fitness than individuals with the average form of the trait. For example, Chinook salmon males compete with each other to fertilize the female eggs. Large fish have an advantage because they're strong fighters. Smaller fish also have an advantage because they can sneak in while the large fish are fighting and fertilize the eggs without being seen. Now, medium fish aren't big enough to fight and win, and they're too big to sneak in without getting caught. So it pays to be extreme in this case.
Let's move on. So, in all of our discussion, we've talked about 5 different processes of evolution. And we do have a little bit more to go over in terms of what are the implications of all of these processes. Obviously it's evolution, but like how. So to start off our talk, let's look at this. So these are a male and female peafowl. So it's pretty straightforward, but what are some differences that we can see? Any hands?
The male one has brighter colors.
Male is a brighter color. Marina?
The male has a long tail.
Say it one more time.
The male has a little tail.
The female has a little tail?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I can't. What else? That's it?
The male's legs are longer.
The male's legs are longer and it's taller. They're brighter, the colors are brighter, the tail is longer in the male, the female is more brownish in its wing color. Yes, it has a more of a little green iridescence around its throat, but this color is so that way it can do what? Blend into the environment. But here, this is obviously not going to what? blend in. Can it just get up and fly away? No, it is a little bit harder for them to fly. They can fly, again, but it is a little bit more difficult because why?
Their feathers are too heavy.
The tail feathers are too heavy. So as a female peafowl, or otherwise known as a peahen, as it's looking at a male peafowl or a peacock, how or why does it choose that one?
More attractive.
How is it more attractive? How, as a female peafowl, how is that more attractive? What does that tell you? If you're brightly colored, you what?
Stand out.
Stand out. And if you can't fly very far because your tail is so big, that means you can't really run away, right? But if you are living right in front of you, so that means you can live, right? Does that make sense? Like if you're really big and you really can't fly away and everyone else can, and you're sitting there with a predator and you can still manage to escape, that means that you might have pretty good genes, right? You might be just a little bit faster, you might just have a little bit more agility or whatever, right? So the point of this is that the male peafowl is still living, even though it has brightly colored feathers, as well as being a little bit bigger and bigger tail feathers and not being able to fly away, and it's still surviving. That means that it has good genes. And what does good genes mean? That means your babies will have good genes as well. Does that make sense? Okay. So this idea of differences between males and females is one example of a specific type of reproductive strategy. There are two main types of reproductive strategies, or how having babies. One is looking at sexual selection. Sexual selection is where we have individuals selecting traits off of differences in sexes. In sexual selection, we have individuals selecting for those differences from different sexes. For example, if we can see right here, sexual selection leads to sexual dimorphism, or in other words, actual physical differences between both sexes. If we see, this is a male baboon. Again, you have spaces there for you to write examples. The first example that you can write down is what?
The peacock and the peafowl.
Or just peafowl. The second example is the baboons. Again, this is a female right here. This is not a baby. It's not a baby. I know. This is a female, this is a male. There's huge change in size, and it's because male baboons are in charge of a troop of around 60 or 50 to 80 individuals. So it's basically like a little small town. Okay? And because they're the ones in charge, they have to protect them from other baboons, from wild dogs, from jackals, coyotes, whatever. Okay, so they have to be strong. And that's why they have very, very big canines as well. Okay? And what is this?
Sea lion.
Elephant seal, good. So this elephant seal though, this is the male, this is the what? This is the female. This is what? It's not a quail. So the P has an F sound. Pheasant. Pheasants, quails, they're just very small game birds. But again, males are more brightly colored, males are larger, males have larger canines, larger stuff in general, because they're fighting for the attention of the females. And again, very similar to the peacocks, if you are larger, still alive, and you can fight for the female's attention, that means that you must have some kind of genes that make you more adaptive. And as a female, eggs are expensive. That means that you're more likely to mate with that individual to make sure that your kids have a higher chance of being successful as well. Okay? Any questions?
No.
Does that make sense? Thumbs up. Jonathan, you listening? Okay, good. So again, this is for what? Sexual selection. Selecting for differences in the sexes, which leads to sexual dimorphism, which leads to actual complete differences in the actual way that males and females look. Okay? So I don't have to listen to it. But if you look right here, what do we see? Because this is another great example of sexual dimorphism. What is that? Well, yeah, but like, what animal? I'm pretty sure whatever you think is probably what it is. What do you think it is? A deer. Okay, so let's just go with the deer. So if this is a deer, what do we notice? We know from even just like living our lives, male deer do what? They fight, right? Yeah? Okay, good. We know they don't play tic-tac-toe. So they fight for the attention of the females, but as they fight for the attention of the females, they're, again, hitting each other with their antlers, fighting, going back and forth. But as they do that, what happened with this individual, or these two individuals, I should say? Their antlers got stuck, right? They locked in. Then what we see that is literally the skull of another deer, right? But is it going to stay like that forever?
Yeah.
No. Most deer species, there's only one species. There's very few species that they don't that they stay all year round. And those are caribou or reindeer. But even that, the female caribou's antlers stay year round. Male caribou antlers break off during the winter time. Do you know what caribou are? They're reindeer.
They're in the Polar Express.
That's true. So technically and biologically, when you see like what is it, Dancer and Prancer and Vixen and the Rudolph and the other ones, so are those males or females? Females. Because it's wintertime, right? Right? So it's wintertime, so they're all females. Or they are castrated males. What's that mean?
No balls.
Yeah, no testicle, no nothing. Okay? Make sense? Okay. I mean, they could be males, but again, they would be castrated, or they're most likely females. Because that's. But anyways, moving on. So again, that was sexual selection, which leads to sexual dimorphism. This is frequency-dependent selection. We've kind of already defined it, but what does frequency mean? Like how much something shows up or how often it occurs, right? So frequency dependent, so it's dependent upon how often it shows up. So for example, what is this?
Jack.
Are they the same thing?
Yeah.
Yes, they are. This is a what? This is a jaguar. What is that? It's a jaguar. Okay, so they're both jaguars, but which one is more common? The lighter color, right? So frequency-dependent selection just means that if it shows up more, you're more likely to make what? Or basically, you're going to end up making more of them because they're more common. So maybe you could have black jaguars more, but there's just what? There's just not enough of them. Does that make sense? Okay. So what is another name for a black jaguar? They're like whole movie series. Black Panther. Now, Black Panther is literally just a black jaguar. People call them Black Panther as in like this different thing, but it's the same animal. The same animal. Okay. This right here is another great example of frequency-dependent selection. Again, selecting for or being dependent upon a specific look because it's more common. Again, these are the three different variations of the heliconius butterfly. The heliconius butterfly, this is the most common. Since it's the most common, and you mate with another individual, you're most likely going to mate with who? One that looks like that. Does that make sense? Okay. Same thing with this. If you look right here, this is, these are normal red blood cells, and these are sickle cells. So sickle cells are a recessive trait, but as you can see here, sickle cells, alleles, the actual trait, are this lighter color, right here, this lighter pink, is 1 to 5% of the population. This darker pink, almost red color is 5 to 10% of the population. Then this darker red is 10 to 20% of the population. What does that correspond with? Do you guys know? Those areas that we see correspond to areas where there's more malaria outbreaks. Okay? What is malaria? It's a disease caused by mosquitoes. So these people are actually unaffected by malaria. So they don't actually die because of malaria. Okay? And because they don't die, what does that mean? If you have sickle cells, red blood cells, and you don't die because of malaria, then you grow up and have babies, and your babies have whose alleles? Yours. Hence, the 10 to 20% increase in the population of sickle cells. Does that make sense? Again, frequency-dependent selection is just saying that you are going to be mating with an individual just because that physical trait is just more what? More common. That's it. That's all I'll say. Yes.
Can I use the restroom?
Go ahead. And I think we have one more. Yeah, all right.
Not all sore throats are strep, but strep throat is caused by bacteria. And if you have had it before, it typically really hurts. And chances are, if you have had it, you've taken a course of antibiotics. Antibiotics are specifically designed to terminate prokaryote cells, which in your body would be bacteria, instead of your own cells, which are eukaryote cells. We have another video all about bacteria and antibiotics, but this video is going to mention a concern we all have right now about antibiotic resistance that can happen in bacteria. It's also the perfect opportunity to illustrate a process that usually takes a very long time to see, natural selection. Now let's explain a basic example of natural selection. Consider these frogs sitting on logs in their habitat. Now let's assume that these are the same species of frogs, so they can breed with each other and they pass down their DNA to their offspring. And naturally, there is variety in these frogs. Some of these frogs are darker green, maybe almost a brown, and some of them are lighter green. There is a variety of traits, even in the same species, just like in people. So back to the log. You know what else is in this habitat? Predators. And the predators are finding here that the lighter frogs are much easier to see in this habitat than the darker frogs. So in this particular environment, the darker frogs are having an easier time surviving and potentially more fitness if they can breed. Fitness, in the biological sense, is determined by not how long they live, but by how many offspring they have. These darker frogs pass down their DNA to their offspring so that the new baby frogs will have the DNA from their parents. The lighter frogs are being selected against, since they're easier to see in this habitat. Now, over a long period of time, you can expect to see a higher frequency of darker frogs. If it continues for a very long time, it could even result in all the frogs in this area being darker. Evolution, which is change over time, could take place because natural selection has occurred. Natural selection is a mechanism of evolution. And one thing to point out, it doesn't necessarily mean that the allele for lighter color is gone completely. The allele could be recessive and carried within the population. And because of processes like crossing over and mutations, there are opportunities for variety. But if this habitat and predators do not change, then the darker frogs will continue to have more fitness. Now, we want to point out that Variations and mutations are not things that an organism can will itself to have. Frogs can't just think, you know, it's better for me to be darker, so I'm just gonna have some variation to be darker. Because if that was true, well, let's just say I might be a bit different. Mutations and variations, they are random. It's possible they might not have any effect on an organism's fitness. So in that case, the genes are to be passed down if the organism happens to be able to reproduce. Or variations and mutations can be negative. If they are negative and negatively affect the organism's fitness, meaning no babies, well then that trait will not be passed down. But if they have a positive effect on the fitness, then that frog may have more babies than average because that trait is helping them survive and reproduce. It's an adaptation, and over time there will be more babies with those genes. And over time that trait that is an advantage will be more frequent in the population. So what does this have to do with natural selection in bacteria that occurs from antibiotics? Well, keep in mind, there's variation in bacteria as well. For example, some of them might have an enhanced cell wall that makes it hard for an antibiotic to enter, or they could contain enzymes that could assist in breaking down an antibiotic. Now remember, the bacteria didn't will themselves to have those traits. Like our frog example, they are random variations. However, when you take antibiotics, the environment is being altered. The bacteria that have traits that allow them to survive that particular antibiotic will have higher fitness and can reproduce. Bacteria that do not have traits to help them with the antibiotics do not have very much fitness because they're dying, and they can't have fitness if they're dead. Selection has taken place, and the resistant bacteria are the survivors. And once all their competition is killed off, these survivors can reproduce easily with few competition, and every cell that comes from them will inherit that gene that allows them to be resistant to that specific type of antibiotic. Now, bacteria also have this amazing ability to transfer genes to other bacteria, so they could potentially share that resistant gene with other bacteria. It is possible for this specific type of antibiotic to maybe not be as effective for this person in the future. Hospitals especially have this challenge because they are treating multiple patients with bacterial infections in a closed environment. So healthcare workers must have good hygiene practices so that they do not spread resistant bacterial infections from one infected person to another. So this example of natural selection was observable in a shorter amount of time, which can result in evolution in bacteria.
So let's say through all of these mechanisms, how do these two groups of organisms become their own species? So this process is referred to as speciation. What word does that sound like?
Species.
Species. So speciation is the process of creating new species. And also right here it says, how do they stop from interbreeding? What does that mean, interbreeding? Breeding with each other. So this is where we get the word reproductive what?
Isolation.
What does that mean? Reproductive isolation. What does isolation mean? Like by yourself, right? So reproductive isolation is like breeding by yourself. Again, not necessarily by yourself, like sexual or asexual reproduction, but just meaning in terms of populations. Okay. So right here, again, it says models of speciation. Actually, go ahead and read this one for me, please, Yulisa. Starting right here.
When two populations of a species cannot interbreed, the number of genetic differences between them increase as mutations. Gene flow not random, meaning genetic drift and natural selection occur in time.
So all it's saying is if there's a physical barrier, so again, let's look back here. So this is island A, island B, population A, population B. So if there's an actual like ocean that's in between these two what? Islands, well, what keeps them reproductively isolated from one another?
besides the actual ocean? Well, what? You have mutation, gene flow, non-random mating, genetic drift, and natural selection that works on this island. You have mutations, gene flow, genetic drift, non-random mating, and natural selection that works on this island because it's two completely different islands, right? And because it's two completely different islands, you have things that occur over, small changes that occur over millions and millions of years, and you can become what? Reproductively isolated. Okay, we'll talk about more in just a second. So this is one example of reproductive isolation. This is allopatric speciation. So if you would, go ahead and read that first bullet point for me, please. Haley?
The geographic barrier arises when interrupts gene flow between populations.
What is a geographic barrier? Give me an example. Ocean, what's another one? Mountains. Rivers, because not all species swim, right? What else? Forest, deserts, canyons. Those are all geographic barriers that physically separate two populations. So, for example, thinking back to the Grand Canyon, how did the Grand Canyon form? Because of water weathering and eroding away at the rock, right? And it took a little while or a long time? A long time. And this is a perfect example. These are both squirrels that live on opposite sides of the Grand Canyon. We have the kebab squirrel at the top and then average squirrel at the bottom. Both of these squirrels, again, live on opposite sides of the Grand Canyon. Again, these aren't flying squirrels, so they can't just fly across. And again, not all animals swim, so they don't swim. So once they were divided, because of the formation of the Grand Canyon, they just got more and more different because, again, mutations, gene flow, non-random mating, genetic drift, and natural selection acted on them on this side of the Grand Canyon and acted on them on this side of the Grand Canyon. And we get these traits. Really quick question. What species were they before the Grand Canyon split and formed? Were they the kebab squirrel or the abbot squirrel? Why neither? They both changed their own way, and they just share a what? Common ancestor, right? They branch, they diverge. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Now, this is another great example, and these are the what? Hawaiian honey creepers. So we can see, especially from what we've kind of already talked about, what do you think is the food of this finch right here? Probably seeds, right? What do you think about maybe like this one or this one or this one? Maybe insects, right? What about these?
Pollen.
Not pollen, starts with an N. Nectar, good, very, very good. Because they're kind of like a hummingbird, they have long beaks, right? And remember we also showed that the video where she was talking about convergent evolution with plants, and a lot of those plants, they were red, and they just happen to look like each other because a lot of birds like nectar. Okay. Again, this is more pictures to show the finches from the Galapagos Islands and how islands can be inhabited by a founder of a specific bird and how they spread out. So this right here is an example or an illustration of what allopatric speciation is. Now, I do want to comment on that this is on at the top of the next page. I flipped them, so just make sure you write allopatric. Another one, I made a video easy. So in allopatric speciation, this is the original what? Population. Then there is some kind of isolation due to a geographic what? Barrier, good. is speciation again? The formation of a
New species.
new species. So again, original population, some type of geographic barrier that separates the two populations. Over time, because of those 5 processes working on those populations independently and randomly, you have speciation that occurs, or in other words, 2 new what? 2 new species. And right here, what do we see? What does this picture tell us? That these 2 species were brought together and they made a hybrid. So are they really 2 completely different species?
No.
Maybe, maybe not. Depends. So for example, like a lion and a tiger, those are obviously 2 different things, right? But remember last semester we talked about what animal? Ligers. A lion and a tiger, right? So we can see that a lion and a tiger is 2 completely different things, but yet they produce offspring that is a hybrid. So again, the true definition of a species, very, very gray in biology. Okay, moving on. So another grade, or another type of reproductive isolation is something called sympatric speciation. Kiaya, would you go ahead and read this little quotation?
Occurs by certain population in the absence of a physical barrier.
So in allopatric speciation, there was a what?
Barrier.
A geographic barrier, but in sympatric speciation, there is what? No physical barrier whatsoever. So for example, it's like island C, population C, there's no physical barrier because it's all on the same island, yet over time, because of those 5 processes and genetic variation, over time we can have pockets where we create a new species. Okay? And one great example of this is resident and transient orcas in the Pacific Northwest. So what is resident? That means you're like living there, right? So resident orcas live in the Pacific Northwest all year round. They never move anywhere. But transient orcas, do you guys know what transient is? Transient means like you move around. So a transient orca, they literally have like a specific pathway where they spend like 3 or 4 months in this area, they move 3 or 4 months in this area, they move 3 or 4 months in this area. So only a part of the year they live in where?
The Pacific.
Pacific Northwest, so like Oregon, British Columbia, things like that, okay? So again, these 2 populations, even though they live together at the same time, for a part of the year, they don't what? They don't what? A little bit more specific, not interact, but I mean, technically, I guess, but
Similar.
they don't mate, they don't breed, they don't reproduce with each other, okay? So again, they are reproductively isolated, they separate, they do not breed with one another. Does that make sense? Okay. A couple other examples include the African Great Lakes. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about them, but this right here is 2 different like continental plates, like here. And I don't know, maybe you've seen like videos of it or whatever. They've had it on the news recently, where there's like these giant holes that have appeared in like Ethiopia, and it's because literally the plates are moving away from each other. So like literally like in, I don't know, 50 million years, there's gonna be a new ocean that forms between these 2 parts, so Africa will literally be split apart, not a portion of it. But regardless, if you notice, all of these lakes kind of appear on the fault lines. And so they fill up with water and have been for millions of years. But there's this specific species or group of species of fish called cichlids. And these cichlids, even though they live all in the same lakes, and all of the lakes are joined by what? Rivers, so literally all in the same river, all in the same lakes, there's literally hundreds of species of cichlids. Why is there so many? Because they are essentially occupying different roles within the lake, within the rivers. So for example, when you think about like a river, or excuse me, like a lake, there's like the middle part, there's the edge, and then there's all of the top, and then there's the bottom part of the lake. There's actually several different environments when you're thinking about an aquatic or marine ecosystem, specifically like a freshwater lake, okay? So, and actually you guys probably have seen these fish before, but you didn't even know. So for example, if you've ever gone to Caldwell Zoo and you looked at, you know where the penguins are at? Like the penguins are right here, you keep walking around and there's that all open space, and at the bottom there's that aquarium. All of those fish are cichlids, all of them, every single one. Okay. Again, yours, I don't know what I did, but I completely messed up the picture. So you're gonna have to change it to this. Okay. Because I think this one has like that. Just a second. Again, I don't know what I was missing. Because up until this year, I actually taught 3. There's allopatric, sympatric, and parapatric speciation. And para means like neighbor. So, but I just did away with it and just only taught these. So, yeah. So, sympatric. So it has a little thing, just. Thanks, Ed. But same thing, this is the original one. Original population. And no what? No geographic barrier. They become 2 things, so this is speciation. And then these are, again, hybrids. And very similarly, cichlids will not mate with one another. However, if they literally turn out the lights and they can see each other, they will actually reproduce with each other, producing, putting out their egg